A chilly November Thursday, when the sky outside was grey and uninviting. "Attention!" Principal Harris's voice echoed through the speakers. "This is a lockdown drill. Teachers, please secure your classrooms. Students, remain silent." We groaned in unison. Lockdown drills were routine, just another inconvenience in a long school day. Mrs. Connor stood by the door, locking it with a metallic click and drawing the shades over the narrow window. We dragged our desks noisily into a corner and huddled together, knees pressed against chests. We whispered complaints about how pointless it all felt. "Like anyone's really gonna attack our school," Jake muttered, rolling his eyes. He always had a comment ready. Some of us laughed, until we heard the noise. A dull thud echoed down the hallway, sharp against the uneasy silence. Mrs. Connor stiffened, her hand raised instinctively to silence us. Another thud, followed by a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged. "Probably Mr. Johnson moving props for the theater," a girl whispered, trying to brush it off. But Mrs. Connor's pale face told us she wasn't convinced. She picked up the classroom phone, pressing it to her ear, but quickly lowered it, her hand trembling. "No dial tone," she murmured. The dragging grew louder, punctuated by sudden, irregular bangs. Jake opened his mouth, likely ready to crack another joke, but Mrs. Connor's stern glare stopped him cold. "Stay here," she whispered, stepping cautiously toward the door. She peered through the window, her face tightening. The hallway outside, once familiar and ordinary, now seemed alien. A shadow stretched unnaturally across the floor beneath the door. It twisted, as if struggling to maintain a solid shape, limbs contorting in ways that defied logic. A metallic stench filled the room, subtle but unmistakable, clinging to the air. My stomach churned. "Everyone stay down," Mrs. Connor urged, her voice barely audible. We pressed ourselves against the wall, every breath shallow, every creak of the building magnified. The shadow shifted, accompanied by a guttural growl that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't human, couldn't be. The doorknob rattled. Someone let out a stifled sob. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm, but my pulse thundered in my ears. The creature's shadow loomed, stretching taller, more menacing. It wasn't just trying to get inside. It knew we were there. Mrs. Connor bit her lip hard enough to draw blood, her knuckles white as she held the door. The rattling stopped abruptly, replaced by eerie silence. Time seemed frozen. Then the intercom crackled again. "Attention students and staff," Principal Harris's voice returned, shaky and strained. "The lockdown is over. Please return to your normal schedule." No one moved. Mrs. Connor hesitated before unlocking the door. "Stay here," she instructed softly, cracking it open just enough to peer outside. The hallway was empty. Lockers stood undisturbed, the faint smell of disinfectant lingering. But as I looked closer, I noticed something smeared across the floor, a dark, glistening streak leading toward the stairwell. Mrs. Connor didn't seem to notice. She motioned for us to return to our seats, insisting everything had been part of the drill. But her forced smile couldn't erase what we had seen, or what we knew. Later that night, I scrolled through the school's website, searching for an explanation. No mention of a drill. No emails to parents. Nothing. Just silence. The next day, Jake didn't show up. Neither did Mrs. Connor. They never came back. Everyone at Crestwood High knew about the hallway by the old science wing, the one blocked off by a rusting chain and a no entry sign that no one dared to cross. Most of us brushed it off as just another neglected part of the school, but rumors whispered between students told a different story. "It's haunted," Cassie had claimed during lunch one day, her voice low but certain. "There was a fire back in the 80s. They say a kid got trapped in one of the classrooms." "Urban legend," I said, shrugging off the chill her words left behind. "Stuff like that never actually happens." But when detention ran late one dreary Friday afternoon, I found myself face to face with that locked-off corridor. The janitor, Mr. Hall, muttered about a broken mop handle and disappeared toward his storage closet, leaving me alone in the dimming light. Curiosity gnawed at me as I stood before the rusted chain. The air around the hallway felt colder, heavier. The overhead lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the cracked tiles. My rational mind told me to walk away, to just serve my time and leave. But something deeper urged me forward. Before I knew it, I had stepped over the chain. The hallway stretched out before me, longer than I remembered from glimpses during passing periods. Dust coated the floor, undisturbed by the usual shuffle of students. Faded posters clung stubbornly to the walls, their edges curled and yellowed with time. I hesitated, a nagging sense of unease crawling up my spine. The silence was thick, oppressive. Even the hum of the school's ancient ventilation system seemed muffled here. "Hello." My voice echoed faintly. No response. I told myself I was being ridiculous. There was nothing down here except forgotten classrooms and outdated lab equipment. Still, I kept walking. Near the end of the hallway, one door stood slightly ajar. Faded letters on the frosted glass read, "Lab 3." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. The smell of burnt wood and stale air lingered faintly, as if the fire Cassie had mentioned still haunted the space. Pushing the door open, I peered inside. The lab was a relic frozen in time. Dust-covered desks, empty beakers, and a chalkboard smeared with half-erased equations. But what caught my attention wasn't the eerie stillness. It was the figure standing at the back of the room. A boy, about my age, dressed in an outdated school uniform. His back was to me, shoulders stiff as if he hadn't noticed my presence. "Hey," I called out softly, my voice wavering. He didn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. "Are you okay?" I asked, forcing myself to step closer. The boy shifted slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face in profile, gaunt and pale, his eyes sunken deep into shadowed sockets. And yet, despite his eerie appearance, there was something familiar about him. "Do you need help?" I tried again. Finally, he turned fully toward me. My breath caught in my throat. His face was marred by burns, the skin cracked and mottled as if the fire had marked him forever. But it was his eyes, hollow and dark, filled with something between sadness and fury, that sent chills racing down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a rasp that echoed unnaturally in the empty room. Panic surged through me. "I'm sorry," I stammered, backing toward the door. "I didn't mean to." The lights flickered wildly, plunging the room into bursts of light and shadow. The air grew colder, the scent of smoke thickening until it choked my lungs. The boy stepped closer, his movements unnatural, jerky, as if he was struggling against invisible restraints. "You have to leave," he repeated, more urgent now, "before it finds you." "What are you talking about?" My voice trembled. A low rumble vibrated through the walls, growing louder with each passing second. The temperature plummeted further, frost creeping along the edges of the desks. The boy's expression twisted in fear. "It's coming," he whispered. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the exit seeming farther with every step. Behind me, The lab door slammed shut, a deafening crack that echoed through the corridor. Shadows writhed along the walls, shifting and twisting like living things. The rumbling grew deafening, a roar of malevolence that threatened to consume everything in its path. My lungs burned as I sprinted toward the chain marking the end of the hallway. Finally, I reached it, nearly tripping over the rusted links as I scrambled back onto familiar ground. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by the familiar hum of the school's normal sounds. I gasped for air, my hands trembling. Turning back, I saw only an empty hallway, dusty and silent, as if nothing had happened. Mr. Hall reappeared from the janitor's closet, giving me a puzzled look. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I nodded shakily. "Yeah, just got lost for a second." He glanced toward the old hallway and shook his head. "Shouldn't be messing around back there. That part of the building's been closed off for a reason." "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused, his eyes darkening. "Some things are better left forgotten. I never went near that hallway again. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear the echoes of footsteps and that boy's whispered warning. You have to leave before it finds you." The announcement hit right as lunch ended. "Attention students and staff," Principal Harris's voice crackled over the intercom, unusually tense. "This is not a drill. We are now in lockdown. Teachers, lock your doors. Students, stay silent and out of sight." A murmur of confusion spread through the crowded hallways. Teachers hurried to usher students into classrooms, their faces grim. Lockdowns weren't unheard of, but this felt different. The seriousness in Principal Harris's tone sent a chill through the air. I followed my classmates into Mr. Bennett's English room, the door slamming behind us. He locked it with a metallic clunk and pulled down the blackout shades. "Get to the corner," he ordered, his usually calm voice unsteady. "No talking." We crammed ourselves into the far corner, knees pressed to chests. The tension was suffocating, breaths shallow and quick. Someone muttered nervously, probably just a false alarm. But then we heard the scream. It wasn't just a scream, it was the scream. The iconic blood-curdling wail from the slasher films we'd all grown up watching. The unmistakable voice of Scream's Ghostface echoed faintly through the walls, distorted but chillingly familiar. "No way," whispered Jake, wide-eyed. "That's a prank, right?" Mr. Bennett shook his head, his jaw clenched. "Everyone stay quiet." Another scream followed, closer this time. It reverberated down the hallway, accompanied by heavy, deliberate footsteps. The sound of something metallic dragged along the floor. A knife? My pulse quickened. A faint tap on the door made us freeze. 3 slow knocks, deliberate and spaced apart, echoed through the silent room. No one dared move. Then came the voice, low and distorted through a voice changer. "Hello, Crestwood High. You like scary movies?" My heart pounded in my chest. This couldn't be real. It had to be some elaborate prank, some over-the-top senior stunt. But the sheer terror in Mr. Bennett's eyes said otherwise. "They're inside the school," someone whispered, voice trembling. The door handle rattled violently. Whoever was out there wasn't just knocking. They were trying to get in. Mr. Bennett stood his ground, holding a trembling hand up to keep us calm. "Go away," he muttered under his breath, his knuckles white as he gripped a chair leg like a weapon. The voice spoke again, calm and mocking. "Why so shy? You don't want to play." Footsteps retreated, fading down the hall, but the tension didn't lift. We sat in strained silence, waiting, hoping. for the intercom to announce it was over. But it didn't. Minutes dragged by, each second an eternity. Then, from somewhere nearby, glass shattered. A chorus of screams erupted, muffled by walls but unmistakable in their panic. Whoever was in the school wasn't finished. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. It was supposed to be just another Friday, not some twisted nightmare. "Stay calm," Mr. Bennett whispered, though his own fear was palpable. "They'll get this under control." The voice returned, booming through the school's PA system now. "Game time," it taunted, followed by a burst of static and more laughter. Jake couldn't take it anymore. "We've got to do something," he hissed. "We can't just sit here." "Sit down," Mr. Bennett snapped. "You'll get us all killed." The weight of that word hung in the air. Death Star. None of us wanted to believe it, but the threat was real. Somewhere in the school, a nightmare had come to life. Suddenly, heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway again. The dragging metal scraped closer. My breath hitched as shadows passed under the door. The handle jiggled once more. "Last chance to play," Ghostface crooned. We held our breath. Seconds passed like hours before the footsteps moved away again. The tension in the room eased only slightly. Every creak, every distant noise kept us on edge, nerves fraying with each passing minute. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the intercom crackled back to life. "All clear," Principal Harris's voice returned, shaky but relieved. "Police are on site. The lockdown is lifted." We stayed frozen, waiting for confirmation that it was safe. Mr. Bennett slowly unlocked the door and peered out. Officers filled the hallway, their expressions grim. As we filed out, the once familiar school felt alien, tainted by what had just happened. No one spoke as we made our way toward the exits. Later, we found out no one was hurt, but the masked figure, the one who played the role of Ghostface, was never caught. They vanished into the chaos, leaving only questions behind. And sometimes, even now, when I walk through those halls, I swear I can still hear that voice whispering from the shadows. "Do you like scary movies?